So this is an online webinar facilitated by Mindanao State University Graduate School under the MS Biology Department, together with the partnership with Sarangani Bay Area Outdoor Club and the International Year of Cave and Karst.
Right, thank you, Milka. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Mula dito sa lungsod ng General Santos, pagbati po ng isang malaya at pagpalang araw. First, please allow me to recognize the active support of the Mindanao State University General Santos Management, headed by our acting chancellor, J.D. Usman D. Aragasi, the Dean of the School of Graduate Studies, Dr. Ava Claire Marie Robles, our MS Biology Program Coordinator, Dr. Christine Don Obemio. They are instrumental in making this webinar a reality. Our gratitude as well to our speaker, Professor Maria Luisa Non Cabrera. She will be formally introduced in a short while, for agreeing now without hesitations to share her research findings now in this webinar this afternoon. And to our partners, the Sarangani Bay Area Outdoor Club, widely known as SBAOC, and the International Union of Speleology that organized the International Year of Caves and Karsts 2021 and 2022. This webinar was originally planned as a small group discussion for the Bio 223 terrestrial ecology class that I am handling this semester. However, when I was discussing the plan with Professor Cabrera, we came to realize the greater value of this event when shared not to a broader audience. And it is quite an opportune time as well because the International Union of Speleology has pushed through with its plan to organize the International Year of Caves and Karst, and they are inviting partners all over the world for activities that will provide a venue to discuss caves and karst ecosystems and the roles in the greater context of conservation and sustainable use and management of global resources. As you have seen in the video material earlier, caves and karst are considered to be among the last few frontiers in terrestrial ecosystems research. And in the Philippines, for example, despite the hundreds or even thousands of reported caves and cave systems, there remains a significant data gap now in our understanding of their structures and functions, biodiversity, physical chemistry, and ecological services, among others. And so the basis for creating policies towards protection, conservation, and sustainable management of these resources are also wanting. Hence, this webinar intends to introduce and reintroduce caves and karst ecosystems to you, our greater audience, and encourage you to take an active part in exploring and studying these unique spaces. The goal is to expand and enrich our current body of knowledge of caves and karst, at least in the local setting, fill in the data gaps, and ultimately provide science-based information as a basis for policymaking, again, within the context of conservation and sustainable use and management of resources. We hope that this webinar will provide you the springboard to translate your ideas about caves and karsts and the resources found within them into research outputs, applications development, crafting of instructional materials and other IECs, policy recommendations, advocacies, etc. We really hope that this activity will not end here as just another virtual discussion that we have attended during the pandemic. We hope that this webinar will create an opportunity for people within and outside the academia to further understand and appreciate the significance of caves and karst as unique ecosystems. Finally, on behalf of the people behind this webinar, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to all of you who spared some precious time to join us and discuss with us this afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. May your harvest be bountiful. Maraming salamat po at magandang hapon po muli.
Thank you so much, Sir Ron. Okay, now to introduce to us our speaker this afternoon, we have Ma'am Esther P. Danao, RFT. She is a graduate student of MS Biology program. Ma'am?
Thank you for that, Ma'am Milka. Now this time, let's take this opportunity to get to know our speaker. To introduce, she is currently working as an Associate Professor 5 in the College of Natural Science and Mathematics at Mindanao State University, Jensen. She took her master's degree in biology at Notre Dame of Marble University, and right now, she is currently pursuing her doctorate degree studies in forest biological science with a minor in wildlife studies at UP Los Baños. She serves as the Vice President for Internal in Philippine Speleological Society Incorporated, as well as a member of the Regional Cave Committee in Region 12. Since 2014, she has been an active member of the U.S.-Philippine team for the Southern Mindanao Caving Expedition. She has been actively involved in forest, cars, and cave biology research and has published several papers in these study areas in biodiversity and conservation, forest ecology, biospeleology, and ethnobiology as her research interests. She is no other than Ma'am Maria Luisa P. Non Cabrera, who is here today. Let's give her a virtual round of applause.
I am Luisa Cabrera and I am a teacher and a caver. And one of my topic of interest as a biologist are caves and cars, aside from understanding or studying the plant-animal interaction. I am fascinated with this type of environment, or the caves and cars. I am fascinated with this type of environment, hence have been interested to document and understand the landscape and the cave ecosystem. I am a caver, and as a caver, I have joined several caving trips, exploring those unexplored trips, not just tourism caves. So for several years, our caving organizations have participated in exploring and documenting caves located in southern Mindanao area, particularly in areas of Sultan Kudarat. So since, I guess, 2015, I have been caving up to the present. So nahinto lang dahil sa pandemic. So to most, caves are just a matter of curiosity. Parang, okay, puntahan natin kasi it's nice for, kumbaga, for ecotourism. Most often than not, caves are just visited for the adventure and the fun this gives, without the idea that caves are also places with ecological importance, hence needs special attention for protection and preservation. While the term karst is vague to many. So ano ba yung karst? Karst, usually when they ask me, ano ba yung focus ng study mo? So I'm interested in studying karst. Okay, but what is karst? So even in the academe, there are people who are not familiar with the term karst. So this afternoon, I will be introducing to you the world of the caves and the term karst. So IYCK, actually this webinar, me and Professor Bigsang talk about having a webinar, and since I am a member of the Sarangani Bay Area Outdoor Club, an outdoor organization based here in General Santos City, this organization, this caving organization, outdoor organization, is a member of an umbrella organization of all caving clubs in the Philippines, and that is the Philippine Speleological Society, in which I am the Vice President for Internal Affairs. Now, PSS is also a member of UIS, or International Union of Speleology. So members here there are different countries that are into caving and are members of this organization, so UIS. And in 2021, as pinakita naman kanina sa inyo yung video presentation, in 2021, UIS launched the International Year of Caves and Cars. And because of the pandemic, this IYCK was extended until 2022 with the aim of exploring, understanding, and protecting caves. So if magka-hashtag kayo mamaya, if we want to post yung about dito sa ating presentation, webinar, so why not lagyan niyo ng hashtag explore, understand, and protect. The aim of IYCK is to educate the community about the caves and karst, the ecological value of caves, and of course the importance of karst. And so kaya nga meron tayong webinar today, and I am so grateful to Professor Biksang for giving me the opportunity and for giving our club, the SBAOC and the PSS and even the UIS, to present to you our work and what we are doing in karst and caves. So the title of my study, or I mean the title of my presentation is Forest, Caves, and Water, Exploring the Connection of the Surface to the Underground. So I will not only be introducing to you what is cave, but at the same time, I would like to emphasize the connection of forest and water and the health of cave. And I hope that at the end of this presentation, some of you will be enticed to be part of the small group of people that are doing research on caves and karst. So I divided my presentation into 6. So medyo mahaba yata, no? So definition of karst and cave, the role of forest and water in maintaining the cave ecosystem, a glimpse of the cave environment, importance of karst, threats to karst and caves, cave and karst research in the Philippines. So how do you define karst? Ano ba yung karst? So pag sinabi nating karst, okay, this picture shows a landscape of a karst. And pag sinabi nating karst, it is a terrain. Okay, so at the surface, nakita lang natin yung forest, and then meron lang siyang limestone outcrops, like meron siyang mga white portion na limestone outcrops. But if in this diagram, you will see that underground, there are different connections, may mga spaces, may mga voids. And ito yung feature ng karst landscape. So on the surface, meron tayong mga sinkholes, may mga spaces, mga ganon. So underground naman, we have caves. So it is defined as a terrain with distinctive landforms and drainage system with sinkholes and caves, which arises from the greater rock solubility in natural water that is found elsewhere. So how old is karst and where are they located? So in the map, you will see that the black portion there, ayan yung mga location ng mga karst area. In Mindanao area, extensive network ng karst is nandun sa Visayas and in Luzon, and in Mindanao area, so may mga black portion dyan na yan yung karst area. So according to URICH, according to geologists, the karst area in the Philippines is, ang edad niya is around 248 to 206 million years ago. So that was formed in Triassic period. And yung medyo youngest is a younger portion ng karst natin is 2.6 million years ago that was formed in the Quaternary period. So karst is a landscape. It is a terrain with a distinctive feature. And one of its distinct feature is the cave. So cave is defined. There are 4 important features for it to be defined as a natural cave because there are natural and man-made cave. And to define a natural cave, take note of the 4. A cave has a natural opening formed from a bedrock with dark environment. And the space is just enough for any organisms could fit. Because in a man-made cave, it could be a natural, it could be a man-made opening, and the space is yung kasya yung tao. But for a natural cave, natural opening formed from bedrock, dark environment, and even if it's just a small space, as long as an organism could fit, like a small insect, so we can consider that as a cave that perhaps at a young stage of its formation. So paano ba na-form yung caves? How caves and other karst-associated land features are formed? So when you see at the surface, when you observe at the surface, like in Palawan, for example, meron tayong mga karst towers doon. In Bohol, for example, you have the conical karst. Yan yung tinatawag nating popularly called as the Chocolate Hills. So how are they formed? And also yung caves. So there are important factors. Ang pinaka-basic na reason for their formation is yung dissolution erosion. The action of water eroding a rock material, so dissolution erosion. And the factors influencing dissolution erosion are porosity, the recharge, the gradient, and the rock material or the parent material. So when we say porosity, that refers to the pore spaces. Yung mga spaces, the availability of the spaces facilitates the movement of water within the soil environment. So if the spaces are too tight, then less water will infiltrate. For example, in a clay, less water would infiltrate downward. But if it is more of a sand, ganon, so more water will move downward. So porosity. In this question, pag halimbawa in a karst landscape, may mga aside sa yung mga spaces or sizes of the grains, we also talk about here about may mga faults ba, may mga cracks ba, or may mga bedding planes that will influence the movement of water. Recharge is another dissolution erosion. So there are different ways in which water becomes available to the surface. One is pag umulan. So papaano ba siya napupunta doon sa sa lupa? So where does the water come from and how does it enter, for example, a cave? So recharge is the primary method in which water enters the aquifer. Aquifer is where water is stored or where water table is located. Gradient. So yung movement ng water, is the area steep? So if the area is steep, mabilis bang mag-flow yung water? Mga ganon. And of course, the rock material, pinaka-importante. So ano ba yung type ng rock material? And since we are talking about karst landscape, so there are 3 types of rock material in a karst landscape. Ang common, popular, not popular but common, is the limestone. Limestone is a calcium carbonate material. So ang composition niya, it's a limestone carbonate. And most of the areas that forms a karst here in the Philippines is made or composed of limestone. Some karst areas may be dolomite or gypsum, but there are few, especially gypsum. So dolomite, on the other hand, is calcium, magnesium, carbonate, while gypsum is calcium sulfate. So ito yung mga karst material, yung mga rock materials that forms the karst, especially here in the Philippines. And by the way, when we say caves, caves form from karst, but there are also other type of caves that are formed from other rock material. So meron tayong mga ice caves, mga ganon. But then since we are talking about karst, so we will focus on caves that are formed from karst. So paano ba na-form ang caves? So in this example, in this diagram, so the first stage of the development is when water becomes available and stays in one area, the water becomes acidic. It becomes acidic because of the action, because water comes in contact with the soil that is rich in carbon dioxide. And this water, this carbonic acid, this weak carbonic acid, slowly disintegrates yung rock material. So we call this stage water acidulation stage. And the next step is this one. In this stage, that weak acidic water will slowly erode the rock material. until in this stage here in number 3, meron ng mga chambers that are filled with water. Of course, because on the surface there is water, so the tendency is the water will move downward. But then later on, for example, if there is a tectonic activity, and when this area that is filled with water uplifts, tumaas, and then sa babaan noon is merong another chamber, then the result is the movement of water downward and pagkakaroon ng mga spaces here in number 4, a chamber without water. So we now have a chamber without water, and so ready na tayong mag-form ng cave with different speleothems. So, okay. Now, as the carbon dioxide is released from water, calcite is precipitated here. This water here contains acidic water. This type of water is acidic, and it also contains a small portion of calcite. And as it drips downward from the ceiling, it deposits calcite on walls. So for example, here, water dripping from the ceiling will drip, as water drips from the ceiling, the calcite is deposited on the ceiling, forming what we call the stalactite. And the water that drops on the floor and depositing another calcite will form this stalagmite. So stalactite from the ceiling, the stalactite from the ceiling, and stalagmite from the ground. And ang sabi ng mga geologists, mga around 1 mm, just 1 mm of yung growth ng speleothem for about 100 years or even 1,000,000 years. So just try to imagine if you have visited a cave and then there are a lot of speleothems or mga formations. So ilang thousands of years na pala yung nabuo. So as it continues to grow later on, pwedeng mag-meet yung formations from the ceiling and from that growing from the ground, forming what we call the column there at the end. So the role of forest and water in maintaining the cave ecosystem. Pinakita kanina na importante yung water in the formation of caves. In the formation of caves. So in the Philippines, let's have a walk doon sa mga different types of forest formations in the Philippines before we proceed doon sa forest that is specifically found in the karst area. In the Philippines, scientists have identified 12 forest formations. So we have the tropical upper montane rainforest, the beech forests, the forest over ultramafic rocks, and mangrove forest, etc. And the one that is found, the forest that is found in the karst area, we call that forest over limestone. Okay. So when we say forest, these are a landscape or an area where there is an aggregation of trees, where the vegetation, the dominant area is, the dominant species are the trees, and of course those associated species, tree associated species. So the forest over limestone, in the map, the yellow one shows ito yung updated version because yung kanina na pinakita ko, it was in the 1980s na map, and this one is a much recent karst map of the Philippines. And scientists found out na mas extensive pa pala yung karst area in the Philippines as compared reported previously. And in those karst areas na highlighted in yellow, most likely dito natin makikita yung mga forest over limestone. So ano yung connection ng forest doon sa availability ng water, and then doon sa formation ng karst landscape, sa characteristics ng karst landscape and the caves. So in this diagram, for example, shown below is yung different degree or level of canopy level. So in the left portion, ito yung area na very less yung canopy cover. At the center, kumbaga moderate yung canopy cover. And at the right is with high or very dense canopy cover. And Ilsted found out that merong connection yung magnitude of water movement relative to canopy cover. So the water movement na nakalist dyan, we have the surface runoff. So example ng surface runoff is, of course, yung water flowing in rivers, water found in lakes, transpiration process. So it's the movement of water from leaves doon papunta sa atmosphere. So plus interception, that is when rain falls on the ground or on the canopy. So the water is intercepted by the canopy. Groundwater recharge, on the other hand, refers to it's an infiltration process. It's the downward movement of water. It's the movement of water to the underground. So similar to infiltration, but covering other factors. And soil evaporation, that's the movement of water from the soil, stored in soil, up papunta doon sa atmosphere. And then the last one is we have the infiltration process. So it's the movement of water to the underground. So, ang sabi ni Ilsted, he found out, and with his colleagues, they found out that yellow is soil evaporation. So, pag less yung canopy cover, mas higher yung amount ng water that is moved downward. But if the canopy cover is denser, so mas lesser yung amount of water that is evaporated from the soil. So as expected, kasi nga less soil is exposed from the atmosphere, right? Pag dito tayo sa very dense canopy cover. Then we have this one, and this line refers to transpiration process. Of course, we expect that the higher or the greater the canopy cover, the greater is the transpiration process or the movement of water. Kasi nga, upward. Kasi nga, sa transpiration. Because ang responsible for transpiration process is, of course, the leaves of plants or of the vegetation. Next is this one. So groundwater recharge. So previously, they thought that ang groundwater recharge is going upward. So it's parang proportional siya doon sa canopy cover. As the canopy cover increases, so ang previous idea nila, ang alam nila is the water movement or the movement of water papunta sa ground also increases. But they found out in their recent study that yung mas na-maximize yung water na napupunta sa ground or underground is doon sa area with a combination of a bare land and with a canopy cover. So because groundwater recharge is a combination of infiltration and then kasi may mga, for example, may mga spaces doon sa or may mga holes or may mga sinkholes doon sa area. So mas madaling nahuhulog yung tubig going to the underground, and hence that kind of graph. So the next is this one, green is infiltration. So infiltration, again, movement of water downward, and as shown doon sa arrow, so mas maraming water ang nag-move downward, okay, if mas dense yung canopy cover. So this clearly shows now na yung canopy cover the density of vegetation in an area would really influence the magnitude or the amount of water that becomes available doon sa underground. And so this has an implication, for example, in water conservation management. Now, the vegetation on top does not only influence the amount of water, so kung gaano kadaming water ang napupunta sa ilalim, but also the quality of the water. And it also influence the vegetation on top, or yung land use on top in general would influence the health of the cave ecosystem. So for example, in this diagram, if there is a thick vegetation and expect that doon sa soil there is thick root system, very dense root system, and in that very root dense system there is an interaction, may mga decomposition process, and so merong interaction ng carbon dioxide release. And carbon dioxide is very important in the cave formation. So once water seeps in the ground, it comes in contact with carbon dioxide. And once it comes in contact with carbon dioxide, the water now becomes a weak acid, or becomes a weak carbonic acid. Now this water that is considered now as a weak acid slowly penetrates towards the cave. And as it penetrates towards the cave, downward, it comes in contact with the limestone, for example. And once it comes in contact with limestone, as discussed previously, it dissolves the limestone. So kasi if it is just a pure water, if just a regular or pure water comes in contact with limestone, walang reaction. But if it is a weak acid, weak carbonic acid, and comes in contact with limestone, this weak acid would dissolve the limestone. And as the water moves downward, carrying with it yung dissolved na substance like the calcite, this calcite are slowly deposited dito sa ceiling. Yon. So, ibig sabihin nito ngayon, pag the more dense yung vegetation on top, mas maraming water ang nasa-store dito sa soil na pwedeng bumaba papunta sa cave. And pag mas maraming water drippings, mas maraming cave formations ang pwedeng mabuo, or mas maraming speleothems ang pwedeng mabuo. Okay? So yan, so the active precipitation of calcite is the precipitation would lead to the deposition doon sa mga walls or sa mga ceilings, forming what we call the speleothems. So see now the connection ng forest, ng water, and the cave formations. So minsan if you try to visit caves na ang taas niya is barren, nag-undergo ng ng deforestation, or sometimes may mga observations in the field na naka-experience ng kaingin. So makikita mo doon sa loob ng cave yung mga speleothems niya. Pag wala ng tumutulong water, it's very dry. So hindi na maganda yung itsura ng cave. And even if the water drippings are continuous, but if nakadaan siya ng kaingin, so makikita mo yung mga formations, even though it's kumbaga alive, growing, but then may mga portions na supposed to be white is nagiging contaminated na. May mga portion na nagiging black because yung parang suits sa taas is napupunta kasama ng tubig and nade-deposit doon sa mga speleothems. And by the way, there are also other speleothems na it's typically the color of the speleothem is white. But then because of some impurities, natural impurities, for example, may mga impurities na rich in iron, so ngayon yung itsura ng speleothem, instead of the usual or the typical white, is meron siyang traces of red, for example. Okay. So this is an example of ayan siya, a speleothem, which we call this a shower head. So it's like a shower and continuous yung yung flow ng water, kasi sa ibang mga speleothems it's just a drip, continuous dripping. But in here, in a shower head, maraming tubig ang tumutulo. So this type of formation, this speleothem is common only, ang sabi ng mga scientists, ng mga cavers, is common lang siya sa mas dominant or mas common siya sa mga tropical areas. But there are some reports that shower heads are also found in other areas, but then very lang few. But in the Philippines, for example, so medyo mas maraming mga reports na nakita na may mga shower heads dito sa Southeast Asia, for example, or in areas that are considered as tropical countries. Sample. Wait, saan na yung asan yung video ko? For a while, ha? Hindi ka naman. Nawala. Okay. Wala yung video. Okay, anyway, nawala yung video. So, ayun. So, that is the shower head. And this is not common sa mga caves na napuntahan namin. So, nakikita siya doon sa mga areas na talagang thick yung yung very dense yung vegetation on top. Yon, kasi nga kanina, 'di ba? Pag mas maraming pag mas thick yung mas dense yung forest, mas maraming water yung pwedeng ma-store doon sa root system na pwedeng mag-slowly would penetrate papunta doon sa cave. So this was found in one of our caving areas in Sultan Kudarat. Okay, a glimpse of the cave environment. Yung iba dito sa inyo nakapunta na sa naka-visit na sa cave as a tourist. Yung iba naman walang idea kung ano ba yung cave, or siguro may idea pero hindi pa nakapunta ng cave. So, let me introduce to you the cave and ano ba yung pwede nating ma-expect inside the cave. So, let us describe first yung characteristic ng cave. So, if that is a cave, this is divided into epigean or the surface, the subterranean, and yung high po dyan part. So, we have the entrance, the twilight, and we have the dark zone. So, according to based on observation, so, of course, as you enter the cave, the light intensity decreases. And as you enter the cave, the climatic stability also increases, like yung relative humidity niya, hindi na nagfa-fluctuate because doon sa near the entrance, the relative humidity may fluctuate, the temperature may fluctuate, but as you move towards the dark area or in the center, the climatic condition becomes more stable. So, hindi na siya nagbabago. And trophic resources. Yung trophic resources is the amount of energy available inside the cave. Now, because it is dark, we expect na plants cannot thrive totally. So, pwedeng doon lang sa entrance na part or sa twilight na part where light would still penetrate, but doon na ngayon sa middle or sa doon sa in the middle part or the end part of a cave, it's totally dark, and as a result, walang pwedeng tumubong plants. And because of that, very low yung available na primary energy. So, as you enter inside the cave, trophic resources decreases. Yan. Okay. Um, Now, this area is called the entrance zone. This one is called the twilight zone. Yung area kung saan tinatawag nilang nag-aagaw yung liwanag at dilim, they call that the twilight zone. And this is what they call the middle or the dark zone. In here, some entrance, sa twilight, and sa dark zone. In the entrance zone, flowering plants and ferns can be found. So yung distribution ng flora in a cave. We can observe plants growing abundantly near or within the entrance, and sometimes this vegetation is covering the entrance. Next is this one. As the light intensity decreases, energy also decreases. Yung photosynthetic activity na parang hindi na masyadong pwedeng ma-perform. And so we expect that the type of flora that can be found in this area are mosses and liverworts. And towards the dark area are algae. And here, in this area with no light intensity, so what we can expect to find are algae and bacteria. So what are the sources of energy? We have this allochthonous and autochthonous sources. These allochthonous and autochthonous sources of energy. Observe in this picture, yung allochthonous is energy coming from the outside, while while autochthonous is energy coming from within. So self-sufficient, kumbaga. So in this picture, for example, in this area here, so this is yung mga fallen leaves from this sinkhole deposited inside the cave. These are sources of allochthonous energy. These are utilized by or used as an energy source by the organisms living inside the cave. Yung mga root systems, the roots of trees that penetrates downward, they can also be a source of energy of organisms of cave organisms. Water moving inside a cave, and as water moves inside, it carries with it yung mga leaves, for example, yung mga naanod ng mga materials, and so this becomes allochthonous sources of energy. But in areas na walang tubig, for example, or very limited yung entry ng connection nila from the surface, so there are still sources of energy, the autochthonous. So in here, those caves that are somewhat isolated from the surface, ang source of energy nila is those activities from the action of the bacteria. So when bacteria reacts, they produce energy. I mean, in order for bacteria to thrive, they eat yung mga rock materials, for example. So ito yung tinatawag nating autochthonous energy source. So yung bats, again, for example, when they move inside the cave and then when they roost inside and then deposit a guano becomes a source of energy. So take note na kanina, sinabi ko na the absence of plants, and plants are very, very important in the process, in the energy production and in supporting the food chain. But in a cave, it is very different. So plants are not the primary source of energy, but instead, yung type ng food web or food chain nila is a decomposition decomposition type of food chain or food web. So they rely on the decomposed materials and those materials that are stored by other organisms like guano, for example. So because of this limitation in the availability of energy, so we expect na very few organisms could thrive inside a cave, especially if very few allochthonous energy are dumped or stored within a cave. So in this example, species diversity and abundance is higher in areas of the caves that are near the entrance or the twilight. And as you move inside, we expect a lesser species or a lower species diversity and lesser abundance. This is the typical food chain inside a cave. One that powers the cycle there or yung food chain, ang pinaka-importante is the bat or the bats in cave or the cave bats. The cave bats, because they are responsible in producing guano. And that guano that are deposited inside the cave serves as food of different organisms, different insects. Guano serves as parang the material for the growth of fungi, and as fungi grows, this becomes food of like herbivores and omnivores, and guano may also serve as food of these other organisms. And from herbivores, we now have the predators. So typically, yung cycle or yung chain dito sa cave is not from the typical plant. Then we have the herbivore and the predators and the decomposer. In caves, we have the guano, and then from there, pwede nang magkaroon or mag-recruit ng mga different types of organisms. That is why bats in caves are considered as a keystone species. So what is a keystone species? These are animals or these are organisms that are capable of totally changing the composition of a landscape or an ecosystem. So try to imagine a cave without a guano. So pwedeng may mag-thrive ng mga organisms like bacteria, but in general, the diversity is very low because once there is no bats, walang guano deposition, and so walang source of food or source of energy. Okay. So that is a guano, a cave with very high species diversity. Okay. So, doon kanina, isa sa mga caves found in Malaysia, the Gumantong Cave, na has a very high, reported to have a very high species diversity, na pag maglakad ka doon inside is maraming mga ipis, ganun, because nga they are supported by the guano. So try to imagine if guano is removed in that area, then talagang bababa yung species diversity and abundance in the cave ecosystem. So talking about the organism found inside the cave. So very different yung cave organisms or yung mga organisms found in cave. And that because very different yung condition inside the cave, they possess a subterranean specialization in order for them to survive. So merong evolutionary development for them to be able to survive in that very, very unique ecosystem. So as if, for example, you observe species found doon sa loob, or doon sa dark area, expect na mas higher yung subterranean specialization niya. So ano ba yung mga subterranean specialization na yan? Based on evolutionary relationship with the cave, cave organisms can be classified as troglobites, troglophiles, trogloxians, stegobites, guanophiles, and epigean. So these are, not terms that are not familiar to us, diba? Medyo very unique siya na ginagamit na term for cave organisms. Yung sinasabi nating subterranean specializations or the cave adaptive features are this one. So ano ba yung mga features na nakikita natin dyan? So if it is a very highly specialized subterranean species, pwede nating makita doon na nagkaroon na ng depigmentation or the absence of coloration, skin coloration, because in the process of evolution, parang there's no need for them kasi yung process ng paglagay ng pagkakaroon ng coloration, it's an additional energy expenses. And so hindi naman na nila kailangang mag-conceal. Unlike in species, for example, that are found in the forest, they need to conceal. Sometimes they change coloration to be able to evade mga predators nila. But here, since it's very dark, they don't need to conceal. And so, through time, yung iba is nagkakaroon na ng depigmentation, nagiging white na yung kanilang color. In fact, yung iba, because mataas yung subterranean specialization, masyadong mahaba na yung development nila, relationship nila with the cave, yung iba nawawala na ng eyes. So eyeless na nila because there is no need for them to use eyes for vision. So instead of eyes, most of the cave organisms actually have long appendages and long mga antenna. Because yung antenna na yan, they use that as parang sensors. So they use that para kapain, for example, yung kanilang environment, parang to sense or to taste the environment. So typically, yung mga cave features are depigmentation, nagiging eyeless, long antennae, and very pronounced long appendages as observed in those pictures. So troglobites, pakita ko na yung mga examples. These are creatures that spend their entire lives within caves, and once you remove them outside the cave, they are unable to survive in the surface world. So typical characteristics: lack of pigmentation, eyes that are reduced or sometimes completely absent. There's also elongated appendages, antennae, and hairs that better equip them for surviving in a world without light. Stegobites are the aquatic version of the troglobites. So kung kanina parang sort of the terrestrial, ito naman is those that are found in the aquatic area, because there are sometimes wet caves and yung mga dry caves. So when we say dry caves, very minimal lang yung water that may be found inside the cave are just yung mga dripping waters. But pag sinabi naman nating wet caves, sometimes nandoon yung yung may mga underground river. And so pwede tayo makakita ng mga aquatic yung mga fish, for example. Troglophiles, organisms that can spend their entire lives within a cave but may live in a suitable surface habitats. So they can move from caves to the terrestrial environment. Sometimes during the evening, they go outside outside the cave, and then they forage doon sa forest, but then they need to return back to the cave for their protection. So example are whip scorpion. So in that picture, so yan yung example ng whip scorpion. Trogloxy, species that can spend only part of their lives in caves and must enter the surface world to complete their life cycle. So example are bats and cave crickets. Bats, they stay para kung balikan natin tong troglophiles, very critical, very essential pa rin yung role ng cave at saka yung outside sa kanilang life cycle. So, samantalang dito naman sa Trogloxine, pwede namang hindi sila magstay sa cave. But then, because caves provided some protection and food, for example, so pwedeng nagstay sila doon. So, Trogloxine, species that can spend only part of their lives in caves, but very essential that they should enter the surface world to complete their life cycle. Now, yung identification whether it's a trogloxine or a troglophiles, it needs thorough observation from the field. So unlike kasi doon sa troglobites na from the first appearance pa lang, parang makikita mo na because it's eyeless with deep pigmentation, okay, it's a troglobites, it's a cave-exclusive organism. But for trogloxine and troglophiles, you need to really observe them in the field to be able to categorize if it is a trogloxine or a troglophiles. And another is a guanophiles. As mentioned earlier, guano is very, very important in a cave ecosystem. And in the guano, there are several organisms, especially the invertebrates that thrive in there. So, ang tawag natin doon sa mga organisms that feed or reproduce in guano deposits are guanophiles. And guanophiles may be a troglobites or a cave-exclusive organism or pwedeng troglophiles. They live in a cave, but they can also go outside the cave. Epigean, so these are just accidental organisms. Humans may be considered as an accidental organisms. So frogs found inside a cave, this rat snake found inside a cave are examples of Epigean species. Occur as accidentals in caves, and usually within cave entrances. And they are said to be surface-dwelling organisms. Pwedeng nakita natin yung ahas doon sa ilalim ng kuweba kasi nahulog siya. Kasi it's a very deep cave, sinkholes, nahulog siya doon. So it's an accidental. So those are the different types of organisms found in caves. And I hope familiar na tayo ngayon doon sa ano ba yung cave ecosystem at ano ba yung dynamics inside a cave. So let's proceed to the importance of karst. How important karst is. So there are direct benefits na pwede nating makuha sa karst area. Direct, we have direct and indirect. And when we say direct, those are things that we could easily see, observe, or feel. While indirect benefits naman, the benefits are generally parang abstract, ganon. So very abstract, hindi natin kaagad nafe-feel or nakikita. But then by thoroughly observing and studying it, we will realize na ito pala yung benefit niya. So we have the direct and the indirect benefits. So in karst areas, soil is inherently fertile. And this fertile soil is suited for farming. However, the problem with the karst area is very shallow yung soil in a karst area. Because directly beneath it are the bedrock material. So parang rock na kaagad. So kung meron mang soil sa taas, very, very shallow. But this soil may be fertile, very fertile. So the area, the karst area may be suitable for farming. The karst area may be a source of phosphate rock for agricultural use. Observe in other areas na nagkakaroon ng mining, yung mga limestone kinakat nila. So these are collected and then pinoprocess siya as a phosphate rock and binibenta para maging for agricultural use. Sometimes this phosphate rock are used, for example, in ponds para magamit sa pag-maintain ng yung balance ng acidity doon sa ng pH, I mean. doon sa pond. So isa yun sa mga pinanggagamitan ng phosphate rock. So source of calcium carbonate for road construction, cement making, and agricultural lime. Plants and animals are also in karst area kasi nandoon yung forest over limestone. So we expect there are plants and animals, and this can be sources of food, medicine, and other uses. And in fact, in a karst area, ang sabi ng mga biodiversity experts, very high yung endemicity in a karst area in terms of flora and even fauna. Dahil dun sa characteristic ng ng karst area, because it's a karst area na may mga rock formations, and then may mga caves, merong tinatawag na parang island effect, na although it's one landscape, but then because some areas are disconnected. Halimbawa, there are different caves and hindi kaagad sila nako-connect together. So they are disconnected, yung population ng organisms are disconnected. And so, bawat population, they develop, nagkakaroon sila ng kanya-kanyang evolutionary development, and so leading to the tendency of forming very high, resulting to very high endemicity. Karst area has water for domestic, agricultural, and industrial uses. In general, yung concept ng iba is karst area, very poor yung environment, because very poor yung nutrient and wala masyadong available water. Perhaps in other areas, like in areas that are found in high ground, wala masyadong stored water, but in areas that are in lower ground, perhaps mas maraming tubig na nandoon, because remember yung movement ng water from upstream to downstream. Another benefit that we can get from karst is because karst, nandiyan yung cave, and cave are ecosystem or habitat of cave bats, and so na-deposit doon through time yung large amount of guano. Guano can be harvested, but it should be sustainable. Guano can be harvested in a cave, and that guano can be used as a fertilizer for agricultural purposes. Karst area has caves, and caves are actually popular tourism, recreational, and areas for religious activities. For example, pag mahal na araw, expect na maraming taong nag-flock in a cave, because yung concept nila na may mga anting-anting doon, or mas strengthen yung kanilang anting-anting. Caves are also a popular ecotourism, recreational activities, because it offers a different experience. Unlike doon sa hiking or kung other activities, so different din yung activity or experience na pwedeng i-offer ng cave for caving activity. Caves as dwelling place, refuge, or shelter. Like during mga bagyo, lindol, for example. There are reports, for example, in Bohol, where they survived because they survived the typhoon because they stayed in a cave, because caves may be stable. Caves as habitat for cave animals. That is why bats stay in caves, because these are caves are their refuge. This are safe haven for them. And one of the most important direct benefit of cave is cave bats as pollinators. So bats stay in caves, and this cave bat serves as pollinators to the forest. Economically important siya. For example, ang bats, they serve as the primary pollinator of durian. Now, try to imagine if we wipe out the population of bats in a cave. Like, kasi minsan, we observe na hina-harvest nila yung mga cave, sako-sako yung pag-harvest nila nung bats. So, sako-sako ang nawawala. So imagine ilang thousands or hundreds of caves, of bats ang namamatay, and instead of performing pollination, so wala na kasi namatay na sila. And so sino pa or ilan pa ang pwedeng mag-pollinate ng durian? And so if there's lesser pollination that would happen, and so ang result is lesser fruit production. So there is an economic benefit coming from cave bats. Indirect benefits. Examples, these are sinks and sources of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide are not only trapped in the biomass of vegetation or in biomass or within the vegetation. Carbon dioxide are also stored in the limestone. So these are sinks and sources of carbon dioxide. And try to imagine if some portion of the limestone are wiped out, so how many carbon dioxide are released in the atmosphere, or how many carbon dioxide will not be absorbed by the limestone kasi nga wala na yung limestone. So instead of them be stored in the karst area, so they stay in the atmosphere. So changing influencing the climatic condition. So that is an indirect benefit. We do not see it directly, but there's a benefit so indirectly. Vegetation facilitates in the recycling of water and in replenishing the water table. So the forest over limestone found in karst, they facilitate in the recycling of water. So if we remove the forest, if we denude the area, so sino pa ang pwedeng mag-facilitate ng recycling who will hold the water? Wala na yung root system that will hold the water para maging available siya at ma-replenish na yung water in the water table. Another indirect benefit, it holds an important information for scientists to explore, as in paleontology, archaeology, biology, environmental history. Yung doon sa Callao Cave, for example, in Cagayan area, it was reported na nandoon yung oldest na remain na human being bago pa yung so maraming information na pwedeng makuha sa cave. So it holds a very important information that is very critical in understanding the history of the Philippines, the history of human civilization, and understanding our community. But then, although we have karst have important benefits, or meron siyang very high importance to us, meron tayong nakukuhang benefits sa karst and caves. But then, because of too much utilization of these resources, it led to some threats. And what are those threats? So just to highlight, impact to soil, for example. So some areas would say na, some people would say na yung karst area is very poor in terms of nutrient. But actually it's not. Depende lang din sa lugar. So in here, ang problem dito is, ito yung karst bedrock. Yung kumbaga bato-bato. And this one, circled one, is the karst soil. So very thin, ang problem in the karst area is very thin yung yung soil, and it is found in patches. So pwedeng deposited siya dito sa mga crevices na to, in another area. Hindi siya yung katulad ng other landforms na talagang all out straight na may soil. Typically in a karst area, soil are found in patches. And the problem with this is, if incorrect yung pag-manage ng surface area, for example, if we remove the vegetation, so if we remove the vegetation, very prone tayo sa soil erosion. So imagine, very thin yung soil, and then nagkakaroon pa ng erosion. And so pwedeng ma-deplete yung very small amount of soil, very small amount of fertile soil available dito sa area na to. So yung activities on the surface would surely impact the soil dito sa karst area. And so, if depleted na yung soil sa area, papaano pa makaka-farm yung mga tao? Papaano pa tutubo yung mga vegetation on top? Another thing is impact to water supply. So, because of the unique characteristic of a cave, of a karst area na meron siyang mga chambers, may mga passageway that are interconnected where water could flow in any area. So akala mo malayo na 1 kilometer tapos wala silang connection, but yun pala underground, they are connected by this passageway. And try to imagine if there is a pollution at one point in one area. And this pollutant, for example, yung septic tank, hindi maganda yung pagkagawa ng septic tank. And then yung mga contaminants is napunta doon sa water. And that water flows in the karst aquifer. So all this area, all this amount of water becomes now contaminated. So yung mga different activities doon sa surface would surely affect the condition or yung quality doon sa underground. Kaya when it comes to management, medyo iba yung dapat maging approach natin if the area is a karst area. Because we need to consider that the karst area doon sa underground, areas are interconnected because of this underground passageway. Now, cave and karst research in the Philippines. I will be focusing more on yung sa ecological and biological. Although there are already researches in the Philippines, yung like some paleontology, yung discovery of yung mga fossils, for example. But in terms sa sa ecosystem approach, sa biology, so let me present to you a little about the cave and karst research in the Philippines. For example, itong a new cave dwelling spider or tarantula, tarantula in the Philippines. This was kailan ba to na hindi ko na maano. Recently lang ito na discover na species by Professor Bariondupo and Joseph Rasalan. This one is an example of, based from the picture, masasabi mo na, okay, this is a troglobite, specifically a stegobite kasi it's a fish, so an aquatic organism. So this was the first stegobeak fish from the Philippines. Yun, and this was reported in 1990. This one is a species of Barbodes perfolius from Zamboanga. Another species, a C. personatus. Recently, this was discovered in 2019. And mas extensive in terms dun sa mga cave organisms studied right now here in the Philippines, mas extensive yung study, yung mga reports about bats, so cave bats of the Philippines. So isa ito sa mga output nila. So the different species, they recorded the different species of bats found roosting in the caves here in the Philippines. This was by Jody Sedlak and Nina Ingel. So there's also this the cave kung dito naman sa southern Mindanao area, so Tanalgo and Tabora reported about the list of species and the conservation concerns of bats found here in South Central Mindanao, Philippines. And another which is greater in scope is the Dark Side project of Professor Tanalgo, in which he will be collecting data from collaborators, from scientists, from researchers studying bats, and then incorporating it in a database so that makakita ng trend how to properly manage the bats in the caves. And there are different studies on the population and ano yun siya, individual level or the species level, like identification, discovering new species, describing yung population, like ilan sila, gaano sila kadami. But in terms of yung landscape approach, very, very few pa lang yung mga studies here in the Philippines. In this example, Professor Husana studied about the groundwater quality in the caves in the Philippines. And he found out na he detected na meron some pollution in some areas. But this one is naka-focus doon sa Bohol, some areas in Mindanao, Panglao, and Samar. This one, if you are interested, if you are not into bats or yung mga macroorganisms, actually you could also study yung bacterial diversity of bats. So you collect the guano, the bat guano, and then you study the bacterial diversity. So in this study by Professor De Leon, they describe the bacterial diversity of bat guano from a cave in Pangasinan. And this one is more extensive. From Cebu, they studied ang approach is may geology, may biological, so it's more of holistic siya. And they come up with this scarce information kit for environment management decision makers. So they identified yung mga threats, they identified yung mga characteristics, yung mga type of caves here in specifically in the Cebu area, and then yung mga different features of karst and how we can properly manage it. So those are the different researches, although marami pa, but then hindi ganon kadami as compared sa ibang mga studies. Because one reason for this is generally ang karst area, mahirap yung terrain niya. So it's very difficult to study a karst area. And it requires a certain technique, certain skills, for example, to be able to study some portion of the karst area. But then, karst is very extensive dito sa Philippines. And in terms of protection, walang specific na policy for the protection of karst, the karst landscape. Although some karst areas are part of the protected area, kaya merong protection na nangyayari sa kanila. But then, these areas are not protected because they are karst, but because they are, these areas are protected because they are part of the protected area and not as karst. And so, one of parang the objective or yung mga future direction ng organization ng mga scientists sa karst and yung aming caving organization is to gather more data so that later on we can contribute to the formulation of environmental management na specifically devoted to karst area, because iba yung characteristic ng karst area, very different. So imagine, akala mo it's just a plain area, pero pala sa ilalim, there are intricate passageway. Diba? And to introduce to you some of our, yung mga works here in Mindanao, in southern Mindanao. We have been caving some of my friends have been caving for 2000, and I entered sa caving organization actively. Participated in the caving in mga around 2015. And we have collected some data, pero hindi ganun ka-extensive, hindi pa siya talaga yung published data pa siya. So there are members from our group who are good photographers, and so meron kayong mga collection ng mga pictures. So example nito is, this is a gnatfly, a web of a gnatfly. Ayan yung web, and then nandyan yung larvae nila. Okay, so in other countries, especially in temperate countries, there are species of nutflies, yung mga web ng nutflies nila na pag masyadong malamig, they glow. Kaya they call this a glowworm. But because here in the Philippines, I don't know if meron bang glowworm talagang nakita, I mean, talagang nag-glow siya. So, kasi nga medyo mas mainit tayo compare doon sa other countries. So in some countries it glows. So I hope we could have that opportunity to see actual glowworms in other countries or other caves. Ito yung mga ibang nakita namin. So the Barbodes species, yung aquatic organism ay yung fish na Barbodes na meron nga siyang yung depigmented na siya. An isopod na meron na siyang traces of depigmentation. A species of frog found in the entrance, rat snake, and then also this one, this one is ano yun siya? Cave crab, Asundatalpusa perhaps, Asundatalpusa species. And what we usually do sa aming organization is we map caves. We enter a cave and then we measure yung height, yung length, yung ganon. And then we measure, we survey and we measure and then we come up with a map. Okay. Because we believe that itong map na to is very important in terms of management. So if you heard about yung asan nga ba yon, Thailand, yung may mga na-trap na mga boys doon sa cave. So naging very critical yung role ng ng map. Kasi they tried to to infer asan ba nakita yung asan ba located kumbaga nag-seek refuge yung mga bata. And then on top noon, yung sa taas noon, kasi this is the ito yung profile view, kung paga nakatingin ka sa taas, this one, yung malapad na picture na to, yung drawing. And then itong nasa side, ito yung the side view. So, hanapin nila doon saan ba talaga nagstay yung mga bata and baka pwedeng mag-drill coming from from the ceiling. So yon, isang pwedeng gamit yun ng map. So pwedeng magamit siya sa yung sa disaster management. Saan ba dito yung mga area na prone sa sa baha? And this can also be used in the protection of caves. So ito yung isa sa mga example ng mga outputs namin. And through our long-term studies since 2015 up to yung last naming caving, yung talaga extensive na caving is 2019. So we have come up with different caves. We have surveyed different caves, and itong mga red dots na ito, these are the location of caves in southern Mindanao area. And yon. And we have the team have surveyed around 5 kilometers of cave length. These are yung combination ng mga different caves, not necessarily isang buong kuweba, but then combinations. Yung ibang kuweba, 1 kilometer yung length niya. So here is an example of some of the things that, ano ba to? Ayun. So, example ng mga extreme activities that some of my caving members are doing in the field. Ayan, so meron namang ibang mga hindi ganyan ka technical. Ayun. So there are caves that are wet caves, and so we swim inside, while some of the members are doing some cave survey. Yung caving activity namin, we partner with the National Speleological Society, which is based in United States of America. So every year they come here, and every year, almost every year, we do cave expedition in southern Mindanao. Okay. So, isa sa mga output namin is eto na yung namapa na kuweba, and then we try to see the connection ng mga, kumbaga yung mga rivers, yung mga underground river, we try to see the connection, and in this case, this red lines here, eto yung cave, length ng cave, and nakikita na yung tubig na nandito is nahuhulog siya dito sa river na ito. Okay? So, there are other caves na na-map na nakita na these different caves are interconnected by this underground river passageway. Okay. So as presented kanina yun sa IYCK presentation, merong mga ganito yung mga dye tracing na tinatawag, but merong exercise na ginawa, parang parang exercise in the field para just to ma-feel na ganito palang paggawa nito somewhere in yung in northern Luzon, but then sa amin hindi pa namin yan na-perform, and medyo hesitant kami because of course it's water, and baka maapektuhan yung yung water ng community. But then this is very important in establishing connection ng mga underground river. And isa sa mga technique na ginagawa nila, kung mga localized na technique, which we haven't tried yet, is yung rice bran, yung upa, ipa, yung ganon. So pwedeng instead of this one, pwedeng yung ipa ihulog. Tapos syempre tingnan mo doon sa ibang area kung pag nakita mo yung yung rice bran na yon, okay, so ibig sabihin dito dumaan yung tubig, ibig sabihin connected sila. Ganon. So ayun, so I hope you learned something from my presentation, and to summarize, so the title of my presentation is Forest, Caves, and Water. So forests are very important in the production of water, or making water available for the formation of caves underground. And these caves that are formed serves as habitat, for example, of the bats, which serves as a major pollinator for many economically important plants like durian. And so nakikita natin na they are interconnected, they are very important. So hindi lang importante ang cave sa ecotourism na part, hindi lang importante yung karst doon sa as a source of semento, as a source of material for construction, ganon. So karst and caves are very important kasi meron siyang indirect benefit, like in climate change mitigation as a carbon sink, for example. So I guess that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and some of ito yung team namin during one of our expedition in southern Mindanao, and we do some planning for the caving trip, which may last for 1 month, and we do some coordination with we have a partnership with the local government of Sultan Kudarat. They are very supportive of our endeavor, and in the community, very important that we impart to the community what we learn from our research, kung ano yung nakukuha namin sa sa field, because sometimes ang idea nila pag naglalakad kami doon, especially if with all the caving gears that we have, so idea nila is asan kami magmimina, so mining for gold daw, mga ganun, or treasures. And so we have this activity, we do community education. And okay, thank you very much for listening.
And now let us proceed with the awarding of certificate to our speaker. Let me read the citation first. Okay. Certificate of Appreciation is awarded to Professor Maria Luisa Non Cabrera for sharing her expertise and research insights during the Bio 223 Terrestrial Ecology webinar entitled Forest, Cave, and Water, Exploring the Connection of the Surface to the Underground, given the 2nd day of April 2022, and signed by Dr. Christine Don Galope Obemio, Program Coordinator of MS Biology, MSU Chenson, and Dr. Ava Claire Marie O. Robles, Dean of the School of Graduate Studies, MSU Chenson. Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us your time as well as sharing us your expertise in this field. Okay, so this time, let us have our photo op. Okay, this will be taken care by our technical team.
Thanks, smile.
Okay, kindly turn on your cameras and show us your most beautiful smile.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. If you can open your camera, kindly open your camera po. Ma'am Sarah, can you stop screen share? Okay. So okay, good afternoon. In my screen, we have 3 panes po. So just smile and I will take the shot. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Let's proceed to the second. 1, 2, 3, smile. And the last one. 1, 2, 3, smile. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Now, to synthesize today's